Choosing the right visualization for the job requires first and foremost understanding what kinds of knowledge the user or the reader needs to build. That is, what are the core tasks that people need to accomplish with their visualizations? In this video, we'll explore and unpack this basic idea of tasks and how tasks can give us a foundational guideline by which we can start to choose what is the right way to represent our data for a given problem. So, a lot of the material we're going to cover in this module all pertains to this basic question of how do people use visualizations? And the basic argument here is that if we understand how people use visualizations, then we can choose the best visualization to suit their needs. So let's start by looking at this question at a high level. People tend to start by first assembling a visualization. This visualization may either be provided by the author or configured by the user. Then, once they've actually created that visualization, they can use their eyes and any available interaction to scan the data and change and manipulate and update the visualization to learn more about what exactly is going on in their data. As they explore this data, you're generally processing the data that we see and using our cognitive system and visual systems to try to make sense of the information and the patterns we see, and pairing that sense-making process with additional knowledge about the data or problem that you are working with. So this workflow typically goes, we think, something like this scatter plot, where we are using the scatter plot, we're zooming into different clusters, we're trying to make sense of those clusters and understand specific relationships within the visualization. So we found our visualization, we explore the data by zooming and panning around the representation. We use that to generate knowledge about specific properties with regard to the happiness and life expectancy of individual countries, and rinse and repeat. Well, typically speaking, when we're dealing with these kinds of visualization problems, it's easy to kind of get lost in this almost pipeline-esque workflow that we find a viz, we explore the data, and we generate knowledge. However, looking at the data at this level of detail oversimplifies the problem of using visualizations. Oftentimes when we generate knowledge, that knowledge that we've generated will create new questions, which will cause us to need to further explore the data. Or sometimes when we go to explore the data to try to build this new knowledge, we might need to backtrack even further. We might need to change the visualization to facilitate our ability to really generate this new knowledge. And so by doing this, what we've actually done is created this cycle where we use our visualization, explore the data, generate knowledge, create new questions with that knowledge, and then rinse and repeat and move throughout different points in the cycle depending on how well the visualization allows us to explore the data in the ways that we need to generate the knowledge that we want to build. So what we can do as visualization developers is try to anticipate the kinds of knowledge people want to generate and then design visualizations and interaction techniques that allow people to generate that knowledge. Doing so requires us to break down the knowledge we wish to build into atomic elements known as tasks. So when we talk about tasks, tasks are this core reason that our visualization tool is being used. The way I like to think about tasks is in a similar metaphor to functions in programming. They're essentially the micro scale bits that let us build the macro scale knowledge. In the same way, functions are the micro scale operations that allow us to achieve the macro scale goal of our program. We typically like to try to abstract tasks as much as possible. We want to try to separate what we want to do with the data from knowledge of the domain. One thing as you start working with people across different disciplines that you'll find is that, for example, people in literary scholarship may be asking the exact same questions of their data as geneticists. Words, in effect, are a series of letters, texts are a series of words, genomes are a series of genes, and genes are a series of nucleotide base pairs. And so we often, when we start to take a step back and think abstractly about the kinds of operations people want to do with data, even vastly different disciplines are asking, at least in the abstract level, the same kinds of questions of their data. So we can use task characterization to really understand how we might facilitate this interchange between the data and the user in a way that isn't necessarily biased or complicated by the specifics of the domain. And we conduct tasks at different levels of detail, and we can characterize tasks based on these kinds of questions. At the highest level, tasks tell us, why is the user using the visualization? Why am I as a person looking at this data? So we reflect this in the purpose of the visualization. Am I trying to communicate? Am I trying to explore? Is the data merely meant for enjoyment, or am I trying to confirm my own knowledge of the world? We can take tasks then down one level of detail to focus on this mid-level of navigation, or what is the user doing? Am I browsing the data to try to find patterns? Am I searching for targeted information? Am I organizing or updating or building unexpected relationships across the data? So this is really thinking about tasks in terms of the actions the user takes. And at the lowest level, we're thinking about, what exactly are those patterns that we're looking for in the data? Are we looking for means? Are we looking for outliers? Are we looking for inversions? Are we looking for peaks? Are we looking for valleys? What are the statistical attributes that we need to be able to extract from that data in order to build that broader knowledge? One thing I want to encourage you to always do when you're thinking about tasks is divorce the idea of the task from the idea of the visualization you want to build. The goal of tasks is to help you choose the right visualization. If I have a visualization in mind a priori, that is going to limit and narrow the set of tasks that I think are achievable and how people think they should be achieved. And this can lead us to very suboptimal design decisions. For example, if I'm working with geographic data and I decide that I want to map before I understand what people want to do with that geographic data, I may actually create visualizations that are less effective for the kinds of questions I want to answer. For example, if my geographic data is about electoral college results in the US election, well, if I want to compare just the sheer count across different states, I probably don't actually need a map for that because the geography is not doing me any favors. So this is one caveat and kind of one pro tip when you're thinking about tasks. Think about tasks before you decide how you're going to represent your data. And this idea of thinking about tasks before we build our data really kind of leads us into this idea of who defines a task. Tasks should always be defined with respect to the role of the user. When we think about task-driven design, the reason that we think about using tasks, using the knowledge that people need to build to drive the visualizations that we choose, is because ultimately, at the end of the day, as developers, we're building a tool that we're not going to be driving. If we wanted to be able to define the tasks on the fly and we wanted to define the tasks for ourselves as developers, that's a very different interaction than what visualizations are intended for. Visualizations are intended to let the data speak for themselves. So developers and designers can use tasks to try to define how people will use the tools that they create. And the reason we do this is we're trying to anticipate the needs of our users in the process of creating these representations. We're trying to understand and be proactive about characterizing what is the kind of knowledge that someone would want to build with this tool. End users, on the other hand, use their tasks to answer questions about the data. So they want to be able to execute on a task and quickly find the answers to the task and the answers in their data that they need to build the knowledge that they want to have. So one of the things that we can do to try to understand and try to use tasks to our advantage is integrate this idea of tasks into the interactions that we might create. So we want to think about how can we actually design interactions that let users use their target questions, their target tasks, their target knowledge to automatically update the visualization. So just to give you a quick example task, since everything we've been talking about so far is very abstract, let's take this core idea of working with scientists. So as a visualization developer, I might be working with a scientist who is trying to understand genome sequences for 2 organisms. And one of the tasks that they might want to accomplish is to try to explore the data to assess the similarity between sequences. That might be their high-level objective. They want to build knowledge about how similar are the sequences of these two organisms. We can navigate between an overview level to find large-scale pictures. For example, we can find large elements of the two genomes that agree with each other or disagree with each other. Or one thing you'll also find in genomics data is sometimes we'll have two elements of a genome that are exactly matched, except for they're presented in the opposite order. So we can look at a high level to find those large scale patterns, and we can navigate or drill down to the lower levels of detail, looking at individual base pairs, our A's, C's, G's, and T's, to try to find small scale changes between sequences. So these small scale changes are known as mutations. This is where a single letter changing can actually change how the genome does what it does. And typically, when we're doing this kind of analysis, one possible thing that scientists might want to do with the knowledge they build from conducting these tasks is to examine differences between the organisms, to understand how the genome might explain the changes or the differences that we see in an organism's appearance, in an organism's ability to do a certain task, in an organism's metabolism. Choose your favorite biological property that is controlled and regulated by the genome. So in part, this might feel like a lot of detail for a task, but I would encourage you to always think about tasks in terms of our why, what, when, where, and how. By breaking out a task into its individual components, what we can do is we can understand the task in terms of the context of the data and the domain, but we can also understand the task in terms of how we might design for it. What are the critical needs that our systems and our tools need to be able to serve? So for example, here, if we look at our who, what, when, where, why, and how framework, we can see that this task is being conducted by who? It's by scientists. Why are they doing it? They're doing it to explore their data. How are they doing it? They're navigating between different levels of detail. Where are they doing it? They're doing comparisons between sequences. What are they trying to do? They're trying to understand the similarity between these sequences. And when are they doing it? They're doing it after they have hypotheses about outcomes. And they're also doing it when they want to try to understand the differences between those outcomes. So we'll walk through in the next video what each of these who, what, when, where, why, and how components are, and some common examples of how these might manifest in many visualization tasks.